and welcome to the new show I call The World of Father Mahoney. So, this is going to be a little bit of everything. It's going to be, movies, sports, thoughts of the day, whatever comes to mind. So, my first episode, I'm going to talk about the movie It's a Wonderful Life. Now, when you think about the movie It's a Wonderful Life, you think greatest Christmas movie all the time to most people, not everybody, but to most people, this is the staple every year to watch, right? Well, I've been doing some digging into this movie, and you know, I'm sure I'm not the only one that has observed this, but it's not just a Christmas movie. It's not just a great Christmas movie. It's a great movie overall, but it's also a movie about life. You think about the theme, right? You think about George Bailey, how he feels like he'd be better off dead. He's better off dead than alive. Like he's more worth dead, because of his insurance plan, his life insurance. But when you think about this movie, you think about the beginning, right? The beginning when there's all the cries for help, and all the angels have to find an angel to go down there and talk George out of, or save George from making the biggest mistake of his life. And I know that I don't think this is the very first movie that talked about suicide. I'm pretty sure it wasn't. But this movie uses that as the catapult to the story, which is original for back then. You know, how the angel says he's thinking about throwing away God's greatest gift of life, basically. And it got me thinking, like, let me rewatch this again. I've watched this a million times. Like, it's a figure of speech, I know that, but you know, and I think I've caught a lot of what they're saying about throwing away God's greatest gift. And let's think about the beginning. When George and his brother were sledding, and you know, and George risked everything. He risked his life right there to try to save his brother Harry, and he did. But what happened to George because of that? He lost his hearing, right? He lost. He'll basically never be able to hear again. He cost his own hearing to save his brother, right? So, we fast forward to him going to work with the druggist, Mr. Gower. Now, a lot of people, you know, didn't understand Mr. Gower. Like, if you don't watch these scenes very clearly, you might think Mr. Gower is a mean man. But it's because of the telegram he got about the influenza, and what had happened, and he took it out. He took out his hurt on George, who already had the bad ear, and he smacked him a couple of times, and he's like, "Not my bad ear, not my bad ear." And when Mr. Gower realized what he had done with the pills, he switched up the pills. He was just horrified at his actions. And of course, George never said anything, right? George could have he could have buried him. He could have put him out of business for putting in the wrong pills, but he didn't. George stayed true to Mr. Gower, and for years, him and Mr. Gower had an amazing relationship. And I think Mr. Gower always appreciated the fact that George didn't rat him out. And all these people, then we meet Mr. Potter, of course, and how he comes down on his father about keeping the building alone and never making a nickel off of these people. And George gets his love from his parents. Obviously, his father was a amazing man. And his mother, you know, worked later on, did a lot of volunteer work for the USO. So, you know, you could see that they were giving parents that didn't care if they made money. They wanted to help the public. They wanted to help their fellow man, their friends. And so you see what kind of values that George grew up with, right? So, and you know, Harry went off to war, and you know, there's so many side stories to this movie besides just what we see at the end. And every person that's in this movie, somehow George has helped in one way or another. And when he had to take over the business from his dad had a major stroke and passed away. George gave up everything. George wanted to be an explorer. George wanted to seek the world, build things. But what did George do? He stayed behind to help. He stayed behind because the town would have gave power to Potter if he had gone. But selflessly, George stayed. He could have still left. He stayed because he knew what would happen if Potter took over the town. And he let Harry go to college. Earlier I told you about Harry going to war, but that happens later. So Harry goes to college, and Harry was supposed to come back and take over the business. Harry lands a great job, a new wife, and once again, George, the selfless person he is, realizes Harry has a great new opportunity. So Harry takes that job, and George is left with the building alone. George falls in love with his childhood sweetheart that he met, especially at that scene with Mr. Gower with the wrong medicine. You know, Mary. He falls in love with Mary. But he's so frustrated at this point. And this is another scene, people, that if you don't watch the movie through, you won't understand why George was so frustrated being at Mary's house. Nothing ever went George's way up to this point. And of course he had feelings for Mary, but I think George was afraid because everything George strived to do was taken from him. So I think George was afraid to confess his feelings. And that's why he had that outrage, because in a way he didn't want to get hurt. But he succumbs to his feelings, and this time it works out for him. Marries the love of his life. We're about to have the honeymoon now, and the bank is overrun now, and people want their money from the building and loan, and they're about to basically riot. What does George do? He gets out. He tries to talk them from going to Potter, because Potter will own everything. He will own them if they give in at 50 cents per dollar. So Mary, who gets her basic, her Mary is like grown from the same cloth. She's a very giving woman, and she knows that George is right. So together they give away their honeymoon money to keep people with a little bit of money for food and clothes and home. So once again, George's big plans for this beautiful honeymoon of traveling ruined. But George is so loved by the town that Ernie, the cab driver, and I can't remember the policeman's name, they set up this whole honeymoon scene at the house that Mary always wanted to buy when they threw the the rocks for good luck. When they break the glass, they wish for something. And they set up the house as good as they can because it's a leaky, old, broken down house. But Mary finds romance in this house. And they have basically a backup honeymoon. All George's flyers from places that he wanted to go, the South Seas, were on the wall. Mary was cooking, I think it was a bird. This movie dives into so much. And they have the best honeymoon they could possibly pull off with basically no money. And that was helped by two of the townspeople because they respected George that much to help with this. So now the building alone starts to expand a little bit. Still not making much. Maybe, I think George said $42 a week, something like that. And, they stopped building homes for people. Homes they basically can't afford to buy. Just to get people out of the slums that Mr. Potter wants to pay. Potter wants you to pay extra money for, like, homes that are not worth that. George is doing the reverse. He's giving them homes for prices that he could have done for double or triple the price. But he wants people to stay out of Potter's homes. Once again, selflessly, just barely staying afloat on his business, just to help people. When I think about it, like, George Bailey might be the most pure person. Yes, he's not a real person, but he has real ideals. And then we come to the day, Harry, we have the war. Harry becomes a war hero, shooting down, I think, 18 planes. I think they said. You have Mother Bailey serving for the USO, and everybody doing their thing to help with the war efforts. And George is left behind to fight the war of Bedford Falls. Then we come to the scene when the uncle, his name is escaping me for a minute here. Billy, Uncle Billy. He has to make the deposit at the bank, and he gloats so much. And we get the idea that Uncle Billy is a forgetful person, because a lot of people see that little shoelace wrapped around his finger. That was so he could remember certain things he had to do that day. Well, apparently this was one of those days that didn't work. Uncle Billy gloats so much about those Bailey boys always staying on top, because Harry's a war hero. George pretty much defeated him, because Potter even said that. So Potter figured. Let me go back a little bit. Potter tried to buy off George because he knew he couldn't beat George. The people loved George, and he told George, like, you're barely making enough to live on. There's so much potential in you. Yes, it was a ruse. I really think that Potter knew how great George was. And I believe that Potter would have probably paid him what he said. But for his purposes, for Potter's purposes, he thought that the money that he was offering could sway George's empathy for people. But like George says, you're nothing but a scurvy little spider. And he's right. Potter didn't care about George, didn't care about Bedford Falls. He cared about money. And George, that wasn't George's game. I think if George ever did get like a big investment, he would have gave it right back to the people. So now Uncle Billy loses the money. And, of course, it ends up with Potter. And you think Potter's going to give that money back? No. And everybody's like, well, blah, blah, blah. He should give back the money. They're missing the point here. This is a way Potter can finally beat George. Because if George is arrested behind bars, then there's no competition, right? See, Potter's built to be like this movie's version of Scrooge. But in Scrooge, it's about Ebenezer. In this one, it's about George. So once again, George faces adversity now. They try to restep everything. They try to find this money, nothing. And George knows conspiracy. He's about to go to jail. So, he goes home, has a breakdown in his house, scaring the kids, and it's really not George's fault. How much can one man take before they break? Right? Do you have to do it on the kids? No, but when you break down, you have no control on when it happens. So, and I don't think that was really George's intent. So he leaves, and this is in the beginning you hear all those prayers for George. This is where they start. You hear about, Mommy, should I pray for Daddy? Pray hard, pray hard. This movie gets me emotional because haven't we all got to that breaking point in life? Have we all felt George's pain when everything seems to be coming down on you and you have no way to stop it? So George ends up going to a bar and going to martinis and trying to drink his sorrows away. And Mr. Martini knows there's something wrong and tries to console his friend, and he confronts a man, his daughter's Zulu's teacher's husband, who he insulted on the phone earlier. And of course, bad timing. This guy punches George out for the things he said to his wife. Now, yes, was George wrong? Yes. But once again, he was enraged at this point, not enraged at anybody in particular, enraged at life. But this is probably the worst timing because George was already asking God what could he do. He even resorts to going to Potter for help. And Potter puts that little seed in his head. You're worth more dead than alive. And when a man is thinking the way George is, words like that hit. Because he's saying to himself, my God, if I had died, that money goes to my family. So the way you can partially blame Potter for the way George feels about taking away God's greatest gift, right? Notice along this whole way, I've never talked about Christmas at all. This is a movie more about life. It just happens around Christmas. We always hear about is Die Hard, a Christmas movie. It's like This one, it's a life story that happens at Christmas. So technically, I guess you could still say it's a Christmas movie. But to me, this is a movie about everyday life and how you should treat people. So now he's had enough. He drives his car after drinking, hits a tree. Once again, a man is angry at George because you hit a generational tree that my great-grandfather put here. And so all these bad things are happening, a domino effect, if you will, one after another, pushing George closer to that edge. He runs to the bridge, and right there, we've all been at that point. Whether it's jumping in traffic, jumping in front of a train, slitting your wrist, or whatever, or what George is thinking about doing is jumping off this bridge, right? We've all been there. We could all relate at this moment of how George is feeling. So Clarence, who is the perfect candidate to be an angel for George, because they have a lot of the same traits. They're loving, they're caring, they're innocent. Jumps in the river, pretending to commit suicide himself, but he's an angel, so he can't die. But he knows what George will do because he's been studying George now through this whole thing. He knows George jumped into the freezing water for his friend Harry. George sacrificed everything in life. So this is just another sacrifice. George will jump in and save me. And he was right. George did. So in essence, he saved George from doing that. Because now George is not thinking about killing himself. George is thinking about, oh my God, I got to save this guy's life. Once again, being selfless. So, we get inside, they're both drying up, and obviously it doesn't take long for Clarence to dry up because he's an angel. So, George utters the words, I wish I'd never been born. And we've all said that at times of hardships. That line hit hard with me. I wish I'd never been born. So Clarence is like, just like kind of like in Scrooge, that you had the ghost of Christmas past, present, and future visit, and he got to see things, how he used to be, how he became, and how things end up because of those events. It's a Wonderful Life does almost a similar thing, except it only focuses on the things George has done. So, of course, he says, your wish is my command, basically. And right away, his nose stopped bleeding, his hearing came back, and he was dry. Because since he's never been born, he never really jumped in the river. He never got punched by the guy at the bar. And then they backtrack, and his car is not there. Because, if you're not born, you can't have a car, right? So George gets to see life if he had never been born. And he finds out all these things. They go back to Martini's, which is now called Nick's, because Martini never made it out of his slum, and he never became a successful barman. And Nick is no longer this fun-loving guy. He's mean. and crass. And of course, he knew Nick, but Nick didn't know him because there is no one named George Bailey. So he starts seeing the effects right away. And then, of course, when they get to town, it's called Pottersville, not Bedford Falls, because George wasn't there to stop Potter from taking over. You start seeing this domino effect of the things that happened to other people because George wasn't there. That old house that they end up fixing up is still an old house. Harry was not a war hero because George wasn't there to save Harry. Clarence utters words, "You really had a wonderful life." How one man touches so many people. Mary is his biggest tragedy because Mary doesn't even know who he is. And of course, George is still in denial right now. He's still in denial that he's in this. He keeps calling it like a spell or an illusion. But George asked for this. George asked to. I wish I wasn't born, and Clarence has given it to him. And when he finds out that, of course, Harry Bailey died just at that young, tender age from falling into the ice. These are like the breaking points, you know. These are the things that George finally says, wow. Like, probably subconsciously he remembered all this, but I don't think he had any indication on how much he changed other people's life by his selflessness. So, of course, he runs back to the bridge, and he thinks the cops are still after him, and he's like, I want to live again. I want to live again. Let me live again. And of course, he has Bert, the police officer, and he still thinks that Bert is after him. He's like, I'll hit you again, Bert. He's like, what in the same hell are you yelling about, George? He's like, you know me? And the most, guys, sorry, the most heartwarming moment is when he reaches in his back pocket and there's Zuzu's pedals back there. His daughter, the pedals fell off, and he pretended like he fixed it for her, but he put the pedals back in his pocket. Zuzu's pedals are there. It's like he realized he's alive again, and when he comes to the town, hello, Bedford Falls. Sorry, that's my best Jimmy Stewart. Hello, your building and loan. That whole scene, like, that's when he realized it was Christmas. This is where the Christmas part comes in. This whole movie is about life. The payoff is in Christmas. Now, some people say, was it a Christmas miracle? I don't think so. I think this was a Christmas gift from Clarence. And, of course, he knows when he gets home, the banking examiner is going to be there with the police for an arrest. And he doesn't care at this point. He realized what an amazing life he had. so that if it all ended today because he had to go to jail, he was now content. This is the one thing George needed in life, to know that the things he did meant something to people or had a lasting effect on people. So, of course, he gets home. Bank examiner's there. He doesn't even care. He runs up the stairs looking for his kids, and that damn post, the handrail thing falls off again, and he hated that thing through the movie. He loves it now because it's back to being real again. This is everyday life that he took for granted. He even took that little post for granted. He hugs all his kids. Zuzu, my ginger snap. And of course, Mary comes home, and he's like, I gotta tell you. So she's like, George, I gotta show you something. So they run downstairs. And this is where the payback in life comes. All the town people knew George was in trouble. And for all George did for Bedford Falls, and for the individuals that lived in Bedford Falls all those years, all the ones that George helped, which pretty much was the whole town, came together and scrapped as much money they could to spare and put it in this bag, and they poured it all over the table. The whole town came out for this one man who was in trouble. Of course, we get the "Things be forgotten." Old hell song. I can't remember the name of the song, but I never knew all the lyrics to it either. And of course, Sam Wainwright, who had helped, George had helped for years, getting the factory in town, paid gave $25,000 access to George for this, for all George has done for him and the town. Hee haw, by the way. Hee haw. Sorry, I had to do it right. And Harry Bailey, like the hero he was in the war, Harry Bailey flew back in a snowstorm to be there for his big brother, his savior. And utters the words, "To my big brother George, the richest man in town." Now, let's talk about the meaning of that. Physically, right now, because of all the money that people gave, and the townspeople, Sam Wainwright, and everybody, even the bank examiner put some money there because he was so touched by how this one man had all this support. And when Harry says, "To my big brother George, the richest man in town," that has two meanings. I'm sure other people have thought about this too. But the first meaning obviously is money-wise. But the real reason is his mind is rich. He's rich in compassion, rich in love, rich in giving. So when he says, "To my big brother George, the richest man in town," he's also saying the most pure man in town. because of everything George sacrificed in his life to keep this small town and this small business alive for this town. Now, of course, we don't ever see what happens to Potter, but I'd like to think that George, because of that day where he has now the money and the resources, he probably put Potter out of business. And I'd like to think that because of how pure George is, I'd like to think that he ended up helping Potter. Just like the three angels helped Ebenezer Scrooge. And Ebenezer was so happy to be here for, for Christmas. And I'd like to think that if they had an extended ending, I would like to think that Potter swallowed his pride and came to George for help. And George agreed. Because that's how pure George is. My afterthoughts, but not my afterthoughts just yet, because just then we hear the bells on the tree ring. And Zuzu says, "My teacher says, whenever a bell rings, an angel got his wings." And we got that away, Clarence got his wings. And Clarence, remember, he left that quote, and I'm probably gonna paraphrase this, but no man, no man is poor who has friends, or no man is worthless who has friends. My afterthoughts now of this movie. I know not everybody's going to do this, but this character alone of George Bailey, I've tried to emulate. Now, yeah, I don't have my own business, but what was George besides a businessman? George was a giver. George was someone who would listen to you. George was empathetic. George was compassionate. And George did whatever he could to help that person. And that's what I've tried to emulate. I want to help people. When I make my suicide depression videos, that's exactly what George was going through, right? Depression, suicide thoughts. So that's one thing I try to do. I try to help others who are thinking that way. Because I've battled that. I've been George Bailey. I went further than George Bailey did. And what's great about that movie is George doesn't realize till the end, till he's having this, as he calls the illusions. He doesn't think that he's done anything to help anybody. Because you don't think about that. The older you get, it's not like you forget about things that you've done. But it's like you're worried about what's happening today, right? But I guarantee anyone who watches this video, there's something that you did in life that changed somebody for the better. I know some people are like, not me. Yes, you. Even if it's the littlest thing. like I told you guys like a couple of videos ago, yeah, I work at Home Depot, and I was working out in the garden area, which is basically you're out there by yourself, and you ring out people who are buying, whatever they're buying. And it's Christmas tree season right now, so we're selling a lot of trees. And this this grandmother came through, and she was trying to buy her granddaughter a real tree because that's all she really wanted. And the grandmother, I don't know the story why she cares for her granddaughter now. I don't know about the mother or anything, but anyways, there was no price on this particular Christmas tree, so I had to look it up. And she goes, "I hope I can afford it." And it was a $48 tree. It was a good size, like a 6-footer, very full tree. And her daughter picked it out. I mean, her granddaughter picked it out. And then they wanted one of those things that it's like a stake in the ground that has a picture of like Santa, Grinch, Rudolph. And her daughter wanted Rudolph. So I told her the price. I said it was like 48 and change. And she goes, "Oh, I have $50. So at least we could afford the tree." So she went to grab her granddaughter to let her know, like, we can only get the tree. While she walked away, I put my card in. I paid for the tree. And she turned around and saw me taking my card out. And she's like, "No, no, 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 no." I was like, "Too late already." And I paid for it. I said, "You can go get that stake in the ground now." Because those weren't very much. It's like, I think they were like on sale for like 11. I think they were like 20, and they were on sale for like almost half price. So I said, "You can afford that now." And the look in her eyes that I did that, I've only seen that look one other time before. And some people who know me know the story of my Christmas story from when I was like 18 years old. If you don't, ask me to do an updated version of that, because that's kind of a long story. But I'll never forget that look. So thankful. That was just me emulating what would George do. And I had no care about, like, if that put me short for the week. I had no care about it because it was the right thing to do. Here's this grandmother who probably was in her, I want to say, late 50s, early 60s, trying to take care of her granddaughter, which is no easy chore at that age. I think her granddaughter is maybe 11. So I was just doing what George would do. And if that makes their Christmas, and hopefully gives them an example of, like, this is how you help people. Hopefully one day she pays it forward. But if not, I know I did my part to helping people. And I made a post the other day about if I had an angel second class, because that's what Clarence in the movie kept referring, because he hadn't got his wings yet. So he was kind of like an angel in training. What could Angel Second Class show me about my life. Well, hopefully that's one of them right there. So, Christmas movie, yeah, you could still consider it like a Christmas happy ending. But It's a Wonderful Life to me is a movie about living life the best way you can. So that's been my breakdown. I could talk a lot more about this movie. But I'm going to ask you, as my last request of this video, after you watch this video, whether it's tomorrow, the next day, or wait till Christmas Eve or Christmas, rewatch this movie and think of the things I've said. Analyze each of these scenes, and you will see how George was just doing all the right things for the right reasons. And God was watching. And life was watching. But most of all, the people in town never forget the things that George did for them. So with that thought, much love, peace, harmony, and thank you for watching the first episode of The World of Father Mahoney.